Do 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 bong.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Movies Good, Internet Bad. Severance has just wrapped up its second season. It was a thick boy of an episode, and gosh darn it, we're going to try to break it down for you beat by beat. Shane, that was a great intro, man. I think you did a really good job singing there.
It's the
Uh,
intro that everyone deserved after sticking with us for 10 episodes, right?
Yeah, speaking of that, a formal PSA before we get started here. A lot of you found us through Severance. Now that it's over for the next year, maybe 2 years or so, we're going to keep going and keep doing reviews. We're moving on. We're going to do the studio probably starting next week. Last of Us Season 2 starting April 13th, and Star Wars Andor starting on April 22nd. So please go ahead and subscribe to the channel and tap that notifications bell. That way we don't get lost in the multiverse of YouTube and the algorithm be damned. So, Shane, this is a long one. It's probably going to be a long video because of it. So let's just get right down to business.
Let's do it. So we start with this excellent scene of Innie Mark pleading, or Outie Mark pleading with Innie Mark to save Gemma. And they're
Yeah.
trying to hatch this plan, and Outie Mark has to convince Innie Mark to help him because essentially what's going to happen is that Innie Mark has to go to the testing floor. And then once he's on the testing floor, it will be Outie Mark again. And then once they come back up, it's going to be Innie Mark again, but with Gemma, presumably.
Gone cross-eyed.
Going cross-eyed.
Oh
But
God, it
yes,
happened.
this was a really well executed scene because like
Mm-hmm.
you're pleading with yourself, and I thought they filmed it really well. They used the little video camera, and I thought initially that it was going to become repetitive because he was going to film it and then go outside and then film it and then come inside and film it, and
Right.
that could really easily get boring.
Mm-hmm.
But they cut differently throughout. They even had one scene where he's like on the right side of the frame and then you
Yeah.
fade to the left side of the frame. I thought that was all really well done and
Yep.
something you can only really do on this show, right? And any talking to an Audi, you're talking to it to yourself. But they made a
More to
couple of
come
good
on that
jokes.
later in the episode too.
Yes, that's true. They made a couple of good jokes here too, like a top bottom situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then they made a good point, right? That once he reintegrates, isn't it mostly any mark or Audi mark, not any mark? I'm going
Right.
crazy with my any Audi verbiage, but
It's
it
gonna
would be
happen all
mostly,
episode.
yes, it would be mostly Audi mark in that hybrid version. So
Yeah.
the Innie is not really convinced by this. And I wouldn't really be either, especially because Audi Mark makes a very big mistake, which is he calls Helena Helene
Yeah.
instead of Helly.
Yes.
And for any Mark, that really cuts deep because, I'm going to save the person that you love, but you can't even get the person who I love's name
Mm-hmm.
right. So, like, for him, that's very insulting. And
Yeah.
of course, it would be. But then Cobell gets involved and she tells him about what they're doing, what macro data refinement is. And this is something that we basically got right in the episode a few episodes ago. I think a
Damn
lot of
right.
people did. So,
Yeah. So what? We're celebrating the W here, Shane. Got something right for once. It's
yes,
not
we
doesn't
did.
happen often in my
We
life.
did. We
Dang.
did. We took some beatings earlier in the season for getting details wrong, but we got our predictions right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, essentially, they are refining the four tempers in each different file is a different innie of Gemma.
Hmm.
So when she goes into a new room, that's a different innie
Yep.
contained, and they are refining that specific innie. It's the four tempers: woe, frolic, malice, and dread that they're taming. But then she lets him in on the big secret, which is that whenever he finishes the file, he's dead anyways.
Yep.
So you might as well help us because it's not going to save you regardless. I don't know if she's lying or not, but I think that
I
is
don't
what
know.
he probably needed to hear. But he still doesn't fully buy in and says basically, like, just the next time I wake up, I want to be on the severed floor. And so that is what happens. We cut
Yeah.
to the severed floor. So
Two
Mark
quick things
arrives. Yep.
before we go on to that. The use of color during the conversation between Mark and Mark. Audi Mark is kind of a dick.
Yep.
And all of his lighting was very cold and
Yep.
steely and blue.
Yep.
Any Mark has a much purer soul, and
Mm-hmm.
everything was nice and warm. And like the juxtaposition between the two was really cool, which we'll talk about with Dylan a little bit also. But
Yep.
the other thing that I thought was really interesting was every time any Mark was doing his recording, and when he finished, you could tell he was just speaking truth, and he was talking from here. Every time Outie Mark said something, it felt like it was rehearsed. And as soon as he hit the
Yes.
record button to stop the recording, he was like, "Oh, fucking finally, okay, I
Yep.
can be myself again."
Yep.
That stuff was all like Adam Scott, man. There's
Yeah.
some good stuff going on there.
Yeah,
Wow.
that scene was definitely presented to be more sympathetic to the Innie, I think. And that's how I read it too,
Oh
was
yeah,
that,
for sure.
Innie Mark seemed more like a real person. Outie Mark was just like, oh, we'll do the reintegration, whatever. I'm just going to tell you what you need to hear, kind of thing,
Right.
rather than like, hey man, I actually care about you. And
Yeah.
like, if you're trying to persuade somebody to do what you want, you should probably be a little bit more genuine about it.
Yep.
That'll be something we come back to.
Oh yes, very much so.
Yes. So then we go to the severed floor, and Mark is introduced to this mural of him that it's like him, refining, saving the
Oh,
world with all of his friends around him.
it's a little bit of a Last Supper
Yes.
type looking thing, especially
Yes.
because you know that from what Cobell just said that once he's done, he's a goner anyways.
Yep.
So fascinating
Very,
stuff.
we've had the religious undertones in this show
Mhm.
forever. It's kind of culty, so I mean, it would make sense that it's a religious painting that
Yep.
is done in a severance way. Um, but yes, so they are guided to the Egan statue with these lights that go,
Yeah.
the kind of,
It's so cool.
yeah, they've
So
done such
cool.
a good job with the lighting on the severed floor in this entire season. This was
Yep.
another example of that. And there's a letter congratulating him on finishing his 25th file, and he will get a waffle party. And it's like a little like pop up card, like a birthday card
Oh
that you'll get.
man.
But yeah, that returns from season one. We went to uh, the hall with all the animatronics, and that was one of them.
Yep.
Uh, so then I love this little shot. It's not consequential, but Milchuk just walks in and he just like turns all the lights on. It was just like a funny, like it's all dramatic. Fuck it. All the lights are back on now.
Yep.
But at the same time, Dylan also arrives because his Audi said no to the resignation request.
Yep.
And Milchuk gives him his resignation request letter and tells him like, I got shit to do, so you can read this yourself. And then he like scampers away, just sprints away. I got a good
Yeah.
laugh out of that.
Yep.
But it's a nice little scene of another example of an Innie and an Outie conversing.
Mhm.
And the Outie basically tells him like, I am mad at what you did, but I get it, right? Like,
Yep.
Gretchen's awesome, and if you're me, then of course you would think Gretchen is awesome. And another thing that he mentions is that he wants him to stick around because he likes the idea that there is a version of him that is confident and self-assured, because that is not his Outie version.
Yep. Interestingly enough, they did the opposite with the lighting in this one. So Dylan is in a very cold room, a
Yeah.
lot of blue light. And when Outie Dylan is writing the letter, it's very warm. And it's probably the most sincere that Outie Dylan has been to himself
Yeah.
in a long time, if not ever. Right.
Yeah.
Aside from the fuck you at the beginning of the letter, which was a very Dylan thing
Yeah.
to put in there. But yeah, it's really good stuff. And just the idea that Dylan, Outie Dylan selfishly wants any Dylan to stick around because he's like, I know that guy is in here somewhere. And
Mhm.
anybody who's been depressed or had a hard time in a relationship or anything like that, they have had that exact same thought. So that's
Yeah.
like a very relatable scene, which I thought was, and it was really well done. Zach Sherry did a great job acting it too.
Yeah. Agreed. Um, but yes, so then we cut over to Mark with Helly, and Mark doesn't want to finish the file because he wants to stay in what is it? What's the Alice in Wonder? Stay in Wonderland.
That's
Uh,
right.
yeah, he doesn't want to take the, what is it? The red pill from the Matrix. He takes the red one.
Whichever one.
I forget. It's the red one. He wants to take the blue one and stay in Wonderland.
La La Land.
Uh, but anyway, I probably messed that up, even though I love that movie.
Drop us a
Anyways,
comment below if we fucked up that Matrix reference.
probably did. But yes. But then, Helly convinces him to finish the file. And then we get a nice little full circle moment where she mentions that she's been exploring other places other than Delaware, because
Mhm.
Delaware was, of course, when they first met, Mark asked her name a U.S. territory, state or territory, and she said Delaware.
Yep.
Right. So it's a nice little full circle. We go back to the beginning of the show, and now this is maybe their last meeting, right?
Yep.
This might be the last time they ever see each other.
That's it.
And then they make a couple jokes about the equator, which they don't know what it is, but it could be a big building that turned into a continent. I loved that. But then we are introduced to what we themed our intro to this video on, which is this NBA style intro with the statue of Kier. It is set to Sirius by the Alan Parsons Project, which
Yep.
was the Chicago Bulls intro song from the 1990s. And when this scene popped up, my immediate thought was, Ben Stiller, you son of a bitch. That Ben Stiller is such a huge basketball fan that this was
Huge.
100% his idea to
Yep.
do it like this and use that exact song. That is Ben Stiller just speaking through the screen right there.
Yep.
But then they have a conversation. Milchick and the statue have a conversation. They're basically roasting each other,
Oh my
right?
gosh. It's so awkward.
it was great. But
Cringe.
the statue, tells him he's being too verbose, and
Mhm.
if he had written the first appendix, it would have burst like a burst appendix. Good little joke, and yeah,
The
there
laugh
was a
track
laugh
kicks
track in
on.
there, and
Yeah. Oh yeah.
obviously this ticks off Milchick, and he makes a short joke basically that the statue that you made was 5 inches taller than you actually are. You lied on your Hinge profile, Kier Egan. You're not 6 foot.
Is Kier Egan a short king, Shane?
I think he might be
I think
a
he might
short
be a
king.
short king. Or dictator is probably the better term.
Short dictator.
I don't know what he wanted to.
Short dick
No.
tater.
Luber, short dick. We're just racking them up lately.
with the luber. I'm sorry.
Gonna hammer home that subscribe button before we're done and we move on to our next series of shows. The jokes are gonna keep going.
Yeah,
Regardless of what show we're covering,
we've
so.
gone mad at this point, so it's all just going to be delirious jokes. But then we get to the choreography and merriment, which is a Lumen themed marching band, and I can guarantee you 0 people on the internet predicted a Lumen marching band finale, but that is what we got, and it was incredible. And Trammell Tillman was having the time of his life as the drum
Amazing.
major up there conducting.
So good. I'll say though, as somebody who went to school for me, I have 2 music degrees. He was doing his standard 4/4 time conducting, and it was well rehearsed. Good job.
Was it better than Bradley Cooper in Maestro?
Slightly different arenas. Bradley Cooper was conducting an orchestra, and there's a little bit more flow and finesse that comes along with that, whereas marching band is very you're in a box kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So, useless information.
That's what you watch this show for Corey's music degree. Yes. But yes, so then they hatch their brilliant plan, which is Helly R will steal the walkie-talkie, Mark will go to the testing floor, and of course they have the great line, "See you at the equator."
Yes.
Great line, great callback. But before we get to what happens on the testing floor, I wanted to mention another self-congratulations, which is Helly R locks Milchick in the bathroom and is trying to keep him in there, but she needs help, but no one will help her. And Dylan comes along like Han Solo at the end of Star Wars. And last week on the episode, in the comments, I said that Dylan was going to do that. So I am going to take credit for that.
Yeah, that's just another reason why you should comment on these videos, because you're gonna get a Shane response, and
yes,
what anyone else could want in life more than a Shane.
I try to respond to every single comment. So if you comment,
shot,
I will get there.
Great shot, kid.
That was 1 in a million. Yes. Now we're down to the testing floor, and we're gonna have more self-congratulations, surprisingly. But Gemma puts on the outfit she wore before she was kidnapped.
Yes.
While James goes to the computer to observe it. And what we learn is that all of these rooms are a test for the efficacy of the chip. They are putting her in different fearful situations to make sure that the barrier will not break, which is exactly what we said in one of the prior episodes. So yay us again. We're doing it.
We did it.
We didn't get the goats right, which we'll get to, but did anyone?
I don't know, man. That's a weird one.
But yes, everyone wondered about the goats, but we'll get to the goats. But yes, and this one, the Cold Harbor, is essentially her greatest trauma, right? It is her infertility and loss of her child, the miscarriage, and this was the greatest emotional trauma that they could put her through to test the severance barrier. So she must disassemble the crib, just like Mark did after they had all of the issues. And I kind of think that they picked Gemma specifically because she
specifically.
had this trauma, because
Hmm.
she showed up to the fertility clinic. She, mentioned all of this stuff. And so she was a target. It's like, oh, we are going to pick the people who have the most trauma because those are the people we can test the
Yep.
most on this chip,
Yep.
which is really haunting, right? You pick, kicking people while they're down kind of thing, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But they had their hands in the cookie jar because they were at the fertility clinic. The
Yep.
doctor fellow was, obviously there. And I think they reverse engineered this to a degree, which is interesting because in the context of the show, Mark is our main character.
Yep.
But in the context of Lumen, Gemma's kind of the main character
That's a
because
good point.
she is the key person here, and then Mark is just the guy that knows her the best, so he's the one that has to do the data refinements.
Yeah,
um,
and so I kind of wondered, moving on. We'll get there at the end, but moving into next season, if Gemma will be more of a focus. It'll
I,
be the Return of the Jedi, where now Gemma
right,
has to
yeah,
save Mark, kind of
I
thing.
think I think that's where we're heading. It's a good
Yeah.
call. Just
Um,
pat yourself on the back already. You did a great job.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We're a lot of self congratulations on this one, but all
Yeah.
right, let's get to the goats. That's what everyone's here for.
Yes, of
Uh,
course, the goats.
Gwendolyn Christie is pushing a goat down the hallway, and we learn what the goats are for. Essentially, when everyone finishes these tests, they are killed and they are laid to rest with a goat. And we see these like little hieroglyphics, like ancient Egyptian pharaohs or something like that. So
Yep.
they're laid to rest. So Gwendolyn Christie must kill the goat, shoot the goat, and she's lining it up, and she is pretty emotional because
Mhm.
it seems like this has happened multiple times, to the point that she's breaking.
Yep.
And she's about to shoot the goat, and Mark S is banging on the door of the testing floor and distracts them. So then we get a fist fight. Drummond
Yep.
and Innie Mark go at it. But then, of course, we all saw it coming. Brienne of Tarth comes and saves the day. Like, that is why she was cast, right? We had this fight
Yeah,
scene, and they're like, yeah, we're going to get Brienne of Tarth to do this
of
because
course.
she is believable enough that she can beat up Drummond.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And he's choking Mark, and he's got that stupid frolic tattoo that we've talked
yeah.
about before, and
Yep.
it's just like
Yep.
front and center. And I was just like, you know that Mark has plot armor to a
Yeah.
degree,
Yeah.
right? So you knew something was going to happen. You figure it's probably going to be Gwendolyn Christie's character coming in
Yeah.
and shooting him with a gun. But before she can do that, he says, "Wait, wait, wait! We can use him," and that's what gets them
Yep.
down the
Exactly.
elevator.
Because he knows the key card won't work to
His
get
key
to the
card doesn't
testing
work.
floor. He
Right.
needs Drummond.
Yep. Yep.
Right. So then he gets Drummond to the elevator by holding the gun to his head. He's basically like, it's gonna be my outie here in a minute. And
Mm-hmm.
then it switches to the outie, and we get the biggest hilarious moment of the episode for me. I was laughing so hard, where the gun goes off during the switch.
Yep.
And outie Mark wakes up to a blood everywhere. Could you imagine? Like,
No.
you're like, I wonder what's gonna happen, and you wake up and there's blood everywhere. You're
Just
holding a
everywhere.
gun. There's a
All
man you've never
blue.
seen. Like, what? What is happening?
Yeah, man.
Yes. But then we get a nice little moment where the elevator doors are trying to close, and they just won't close
They
because
can't.
Drummond's dead body is on the ground. It was great.
Yep.
But then he eventually gets to Cold Harbor,
Yep.
and he uses Drummond's blood, which in the 2 minutes leading up to that, I was like, use Drummond's blood, use Drummond's blood. Yeah, he used it. So, it's great when writers can put in situations that you can logically figure out 30 seconds before they happen. So I thought that was a good little
Yeah.
use of that.
Sometimes the right thing to do is the right thing to do, right?
Yeah,
Like sometimes subverting is good, and sometimes the obvious answer is the right way to go. And in this
yeah,
case, that was it.
yeah. It was brilliantly set up, right? You set up the blood thing like 4 episodes ago, and it
Right.
pays off here. So I thought
Yep.
that was great. But then we get the first of 4
Four.
meetings of Mark and Gemma, and this one is outie Mark with any Gemma.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to think about it every time.
Yep.
But this really, so this scene was, first off, brilliantly acted,
Yeah.
because Adam Scott is, tour de force in here.
Yep.
But what I think is super interesting about this scene is that going forward in the show, wouldn't this be the ultimate Severance test? They kind of implied this in season 1 because they were putting Gemma, or Miss Casey, and Innie Mark together. and
Hmm.
testing to see if the love transcends the severance chip. That's the
Right.
ultimate efficacy test, right, of
Yep.
the severance chip. And in this case, it kind of bypasses the severance chip. But I wonder if like that's gonna be the next big bad. Is like that's the final test.
Right.
Can you
Because
can
when they talk in season one, they don't technically know each other. So like
correct?
Mark isn't saying to her, "I'm your husband. I know
Right,
you. We have a
right.
life." And I'd have to rewatch it, but I don't think did they ever make physical contact in
They make it
season one?
once in the hallway. They like brush against each other.
Okay,
It's
and
like a
what
copy of
happens?
in the Mood for Love where they go right past each other. Nothing really major, but
Okay,
to the point that like because I think Cobell was actually watching that scene, if I remember
okay,
right. But yeah, I think that's a big test too. And the Dylan and Gretchen thing is kind of similar, where the love
hmm,
transcends the severance chip to a
yep,
degree. So I
yeah,
think that's going to be the ultimate test, or maybe the ultimate downfall. But I found it, this scene really brought it to life.
yeah. It feels
Um,
like it's a combination of emotional and physical, and
mhm.
unconditional love is that's the key to
Love is
whether or
the
not it
answer,
can break.
man.
Yeah, it always is.
Yeah,
Every
it's
good
like
show and movie, it always boils down to love.
it's like Interstellar, and then everyone got mad at that line, and then 10 years later, everyone loves that movie. So
It made 140
last
million
laugh.
dollars in its IMAX re-release.
That's
That's your next
crazy.
useless fact of the evening.
So then they exit and we get meeting two, which is finally Outie Mark and Outie Gemma
Howdy
reunite.
night.
And this was
Yep.
very emotional. I loved
Oh
this.
yeah, it's great.
Great acting across the board. They go to the elevator, they go up the elevator, and we get a kiss Zolly, which is the Dolly Zoom
Yep.
mid kiss, which was actually spoiled by Jessica Lee Gagne, the director of one of the prior episodes,
Yep.
because in one of the interviews, she's the cinematographer of the show, but directed one of the
Yep.
episodes as well. Um, but she was in one of the interviews talking about that episode, and she was talking about all the zollies that she's had to shoot. And she's like,
Yep.
"We've done the elevator dolly, the kiss zolly," and she was like, "Wait, am I allowed to say that?" And it was for this specific scene. She had
Yep.
shot that scene and mentioned it. Of course, like out of context, it doesn't
Yep.
make nearly the same amount of impact. But that was the kiss zolly that she accidentally spoiled. But then we get a great line from Miss Casey, which is, "What's taking place?" Just completely innocent. Like, why are we kissing?
She slipped right back into that character
Yeah, yeah.
really well. It was really
Excellent
good.
acting across the
Yeah.
board. Like, can you imagine playing multiple characters in one show? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, you have to switch your personality entirely. It's just got to
Well,
be.
everybody else is doing too. She's at
Yeah. She's
25.
doing 27 because she's got Audi,
Oh, right, because the
25
Audi too.
innies, and
Yeah.
Miss Casey. So 27 different roles.
Take that, James
Excellent stuff.
McAvoy in Split.
You got nothing.
Except
He
those
should be
nice
in season
traps.
3. You got to
He
bring him on
should.
season 3, right?
Yeah,
Just because he was in Split. But
I think
yes,
so.
then we get to the big finale of the episode and the
Yes.
season, which is Gemma goes out the door, and Innie Mark does not follow her. He hesitates.
Yeah.
He looks back at Helly R, and they have a Bonnie and Clyde moment where they're running through the hallways, escaping everything, living in the dream world, and that's where we exit.
Yeah. There's a couple interesting things that happen here. So Mark and Helly say we'll meet at the equator, and then at the end of this scene, Mark is what's split right down the middle. He is the equator, and Helly is one pole, and Gemma's the other. And obviously, the pull goes in one direction. Um, One of the things they did with the post production of it is as they're running down the hallway holding hands, it starts to get a scratchy film
Yeah,
filter over
yeah,
it, which is the same texture that they used in episode 7, which was the flashback with all the love stuff
yeah,
with Mark and Gemma, which I thought was a really nice touch because now is this Mark S and Helly R's time to let their love blossom, or what's on the other side of what they're looking at? I think
yeah.
that's the big question for season 3.
Yeah, and we don't know, but I can't imagine it's anything good. But we
No.
leave some of these plot threads in a interesting place, right?
Hmm.
We have the scene which I didn't really mention, but in the first scene of the episode, or one of the first scenes, is James Egan talking to Helly R, saying
Hmm.
like, you know, Helena is not the daughter that I remember. but you are, and I see the spirit of Kier in you. This is something we thought about last episode.
Yeah.
We were saying, like, is this the real Helena? And we kind of thought it was more sinister that they were actually switched at birth or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's really the fact that the same type of concept of like the Dylan thing, where it's like the real Dylan is the Innie Dylan, the genuine Dylan, and
Yeah.
maybe Mark too. Innie Mark is the more genuine of everyone, and maybe it's a statement on how the world and trauma can just suck the life out of you, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
It's pretty deep shit. Like when
Yeah,
you really start to
it
think of
is.
it. And the whole trauma thing, I can't remember which character says it, but one of them during this episode says that the idea of Lumen is to eliminate pain from people. I think
Right.
Drummond says it when they're about to sacrifice the goat. And it's like, man, all the pain they put people through in the name of eliminating pain, that's a real fascinating thing to
Yeah.
dive into.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, like we mentioned earlier, I think season 3 is going to be that, now we have to save Mark, when Gemma's on the outside now with
Yeah.
Gobel and Devin. And now they have to save Any Mark. But I don't know how Any Mark is going to stay alive down there. Maybe he's just got to
So
outrun him or hide or something.
my lady and I talked about this for a few minutes after the episode, and she brought up that maybe because James Egan loves Helly so much
Hmm.
that he wants to keep her around.
Yes, that
But in
was my
order
thought
to
too.
do that, her one condition is going to be you also need to keep Mark S around.
He's got the she's got the bargaining. Yeah, or
Exactly.
she's got the leverage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
But at
good
the same
point.
time, now it's again, we flip flop things. And now Gemma is going to be the one who's trying to fight to get Mark out instead of the other
Yeah,
way around.
yeah.
And there's a whole lot of different strings you can pull with that too.
That's a really good point. That's the bargaining chip is,
Uh-huh.
I can be your Heli R if you will save Mark S, kind of
Yep.
thing. Interesting stuff. That's another
Yeah.
thing I mentioned, or I thought about when we were talking about all this, is that in the Chikai Bardo episode, which I could not think of the name of that episode this entire time we were recording, and it finally came to me. But in that episode, the Chikai Bardo card thing
Mm-hmm.
was a man fighting himself, and that's
Oh
exactly how
man,
we ended the season, right?
that's where we're at.
It was an
And
ego death, is what
right,
it
it's
refers
right
to,
at
right?
at the point of death, which is what
Right.
any Mark was at the brink of. Man, that's good shit.
Exactly.
Oh boy,
Exactly. They
wow,
gave us the ending in that
I love that.
exact in that episode.
Huh?
Great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah,
But yeah, I thought this was an excellent episode, a great finale.
yeah,
For those of you watching, we will have a separate video
yes,
reviewing the season as a whole.
yep,
Because I think it's nice to, after we've been doing these walkthroughs every single week,
mm-hmm.
and like we're really hyped up and analyzing all the details, but there is something to the totality of it, right? Where you look back and you say, okay, were all of these plot threads woven together correctly and sat in a satisfying way? And we were doing all of our predictions, but like, how do we
Right.
feel about all of that? And I feel like we're probably going to come across a little bit more mixed in that
Mm-hmm.
review than we
Oh yeah,
are on this week to week basis, where we're kind of all praising each individual episode. But I think that's natural for most shows. But we'll have that up soon, maybe a day or two from now, once we kind of decompress and
yeah.
think
We
about
need we need
the
some
season as a
time
whole.
to sit with things, I think, before sharing that, because immediately after an episode it's like there's just a wash that comes over you of
Yep.
information, right? And but we're definitely going to do that. So we're not fully done with Severance. That means I lied at the beginning of the episode. We're gonna have one more video for it,
Yep.
and maybe in that one we'll share some more predictions for season 3 as well.
Yeah. And we will definitely be here for season 3, whenever that may be.
God willing, Kier willing, we'll be there
Yes.
for season 3. Awesome, man. Well, that's gonna do it for this one. Very excited to hear what y'all have to say. Please drop us those comments. We've had a lot of great dialogue throughout this entire season on what you thought, where you think it's going, what we messed up on. Bring it on. We're excited. We're ready for all of it. And please go ahead, like this video if you liked it, so that way the YouTube algorithm boosts it. And if you want to stick around with us past Severance, like I said at the top, please go ahead and subscribe to the video, tap that notifications bell. The Studio comes out next week, which looks like a very funny comedy. We're going to be covering season 2 of The Last of Us, which will be a very not funny, evil, dramatic awful
We
time.
both played the game, so we know what's coming. It's going to be
Yeah.
interesting.
Lord Almighty. And then same thing for Andor season 2. Probably going to be a real depressing run of television there, but we're going to do our best to cover it all. So please stay tuned to all of that and so much more. Until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video.